Hello there, and welcome to another session, Solving Tactics on ChessTempo.com with The Advocate. This set is 1500 to 1600, and without further ado, without further introduction, let's go ahead and get started. Sip my hot chocolate. It's almost midnight. Rook e8 check, King f7, Rook takes here check, Rook takes here, Pawn takes here, Queen takes here, Rook takes here, do a quick material count. 2 rooks, 1 rook, so we're up the exchange. We're up the exchange, and if rook takes, knight takes, bishop takes, knight takes, g takes f, a3 or something. That's just knight against knight. So there's also rook takes a6. He needs to get rid of his own rook. So rook takes a6. If knight takes, I'm a knight against a rook. I'm a rook up, right? Rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes a6. I am a rook, 2 rooks and a knight against a rook and a knight. So if the knight takes here and I take here, I'm a rook up. If rook moves away and I take on a7, I'm a rook up. So it looks like in all of that, I'm always a rook up. I've already talked about the continuations. Yeah, the key is just to figure out how to sell your rook for the highest price. Mistakes that are made: queen takes e4, queen takes e4, pawn takes, rook takes, pawn takes. So here, 2, 5, 2, 5, 6. we are threatening this pawn. Black's pawn structure is not all that great, but I think there's some compensation in the form of the passed e-pawn. Not that it's enough. For example, you don't have to protect the a2 pawn. You could also play something like this. Or you could protect the a2 pawn like this. So, this is still winning. This is the book line. This is the computer's line. Makes sense. We're the exchange up. Another mistake that is made is rook e8 check. Yeah, that was the first move that I examined. And if you were here for me last session, I think I did like a little one of these with my mouse, thinking that rook e8 check was going to be the move. It just looks like a very tacticky move. But after rook e8 check, rook takes e8, queen takes e check, there doesn't seem to be much there. You know? This doesn't feel like winning. Those are by far the most common mistakes that are made. How did I solve this problem? First, by eliminating rook e8 check as a move. That was definitely the first thing that I did. Then eliminating other takes. For example, queen takes d5, queen takes here. I didn't like. This all of these forcing moves that weren't really working led me to consider rook takes f6, and then in exploring the resulting positions, for example, what happens if knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes here. This is what I was most worried about, this position. So I didn't take these into consideration, these moves, because I just didn't think it was enough. So selling the rook at the highest price was the move that I decided upon, because after rook takes here, you have this in-between move. So you're a queen for a queen, but now you're threatening the rook, and you're also threatening to run away with your own rook. If black takes here, you take here, and if black runs away, you run away. The a2 pawn being covered is some added benefit. Anyway, that's how I figured out the problem. Rook c4, this is a pin. It's not a real pin. There are many ways to resolve it. However, if knight here, is this checkmate? Knight d5 threatens knight e7 checkmate. All of these squares are covered by pawns. This has nowhere to go. So the knight on e7 would cover g6 and f5. So that would be mates. It's a revealed attack on this rook. Incidentally, it covers my h4 pawn. If rook c7, I can take on c7. If king moves away, I pick up on c4 for free. So rook c7 seems to be the best move, and after rook c7, knight takes c7, knight takes c7. Maybe f4? Or b4? Just getting the queen as fast as possible. Now on knight c7, if f4, there is knight d5 check, picking up f4. So that's not good. However, rook takes f4, pawn takes f4 check, king f3. I'm winning with these two pawns. So even f4 would be fine, inviting knight d5 check. Okay. So the move is not knight c6, knight d5, threatening mate, threatening the rook. Wrong moves made in this position, b3. Yeah, b3, I considered, but then ultimately dismissed. First of all, because it doesn't win material. Second of all, because it loses h4. So I dismissed this. I started looking for knight checks and couldn't find any, but then I noticed that there's more checks after the knight moves away. So I was trying to get one of those knight checks to work to somehow rescue this rook, and from that I discovered knight e7 check. Rook a6 is a move that's played in this position, but this is just a shot in the dark. It does nothing, and h4 is still falling. Although here this is no longer a threat because the h4 pawn no longer covers the g5 square. This was a tall game, tall with the white pieces. Mikhail Tal. Alright, let's go to the next problem. Black to move. Has just sacrificed a piece. So if king takes, check, king back, knight takes c7. And then a5 is looking real weak. But what if I take on b5 first? b5, if the bishop goes away, I will take on a4, or I will take on c4. If you take back, then I will take on f5. And then I need to demonstrate that I can stop these pawns. So for example, let's try king here, pawn here, like let's say takes, takes, takes. If king here, I'm going to take on a4. I'll sacrifice this piece, and then I'll serdem. I will try to queen with the a pawn, distract this king from the defense of the g and h pawns. And if a takes, so bishop takes, pawn takes, king takes f, king d4, I will play a4, king takes c5, I will play a3, b6, a2, b7, a1 queen, b8 queen. So that's not the way to go. So let's say bishop takes, a takes, king takes, d4, king d4, knight b7, c5, a4, c6, knight d6, a3, and now the king must go back to c3. I'll bring my king to e5, king b3, king d5, b6, king takes c6. Looks like I'm doing okay. I'll stop those pawns. How do you stop this, though? What do I do here? Maybe knight a4, so that way I can do this. And this is the idea. If the king comes over here, I'm going to take, and then queen with the a pawn. And if you try to queen, I'm not certain how. Let's say king comes here, pawn here. I'm going to take. So you need to play something like this. But then I can take, and queen. Okay? Difficult endgame to win even with the knight up because of these two passed pawns. 23 wrong attempts. The first being king takes a5, which doesn't work because of this. Another mistake that's made is knight takes a4, but that's just material equality. 2-2, 1-1. So that's clearly not the answer. Next problem. Hmm. Bishop takes check. King here. Knight check. Bishop takes check. King takes. Queen takes f8. No, it's just a pawn win, actually. No, because the bishop recaptures on c7, b7. So how do you do this? Bishop takes check and knight takes check are both worth looking at. Bishop takes check. King here. Queen check. Bishop takes check. King here. Knight check. King back to f7. I'd like to somehow use this pawn, but I'm just not sure. How to do it. So the knight came in here hitting the queen. Bishop takes e6 check. King takes e6. Bishop takes e6 check. King takes e6. Queen e8 check. Bishop here, and then knight check. Forking the king and the queen. Bishop check. King here, queen check here is mates. Knight back, queen takes his mates. So bishop takes check. King here. Queen e8 check. King here. Knight check is mates. The king has no squares. Yeah, so I think that's it. I think that's the mate. Bishop takes check. If king Here, queen check, knight here, queen takes check is mate. Bishop check, king takes, queen check, and the only move is bishop e7, but then knight c5 will be mate. Good one. Very good. Very, very good problem. Very good for calculating. 32 wrong moves. Knight takes e5 check. First, let's do a quick piece count. 2, 2, 3, 3. But two of our pieces are under attack. And even after knight takes e5, you still have two major pieces, two minor pieces under attack. So you have to resolve this problem, you have to resolve this problem, and you also have to resolve any reveals with the bishop. So white should lose a piece here after knight takes e5 check. Another mistake that is made is knight takes f8 check after the second move. That's the most common mistake. The most common mistake here is knight takes f8 check. But here the king can go back to f7, and the knight is pinned to the queen. So this knight will get picked back up on the next move. That was the problem that I saw with this variation. How did I figure that out? Well, first I looked at knight takes e5, and I looked at knight c5, and decided that they weren't good moves for reasons that I've already recounted. For example, after knight c5, bishop takes c5, queen takes, you're getting two pieces for the knight c5, bishop takes, queen takes, pawn takes. Black has won two pieces for the rook. His king is actually very safe, and there's an attack coming against the white king. Rook b8, bishop a3, c3, all of these moves are on. So I dismissed this move. And bishop e6 was really the only check that was left in the position. And after bishop e6, it was easy to figure out queen e8 check. Something important to note is that this is also checkmate. You can see that the king has no dark squares, no light squares. So the only move is this, and then queen takes mate. Next problem. So this queen is covering this. And this bishop is covering this. Also pinning my rook. Is there any way that I can get around that? Now obviously I can take here. But Queen h4 check isn't somehow working. No. Queen takes g5 check is no. So I don't see much better than just taking on e3. Take on e3, rook check, rook h1, bishop check, king g1, rook g2 check. Wait. Take on e3, rook a2 check, king g1, rook a1 check, king f2, and if check again, I'm escaping on f3. Bishop check, I'll have king e4. I could also be a little bit more humble about it. Take here, but then after queen check, king here, queen takes check, I don't think I have anything. I'm certain that this is one of those super easy problems that is being made super difficult because people are playing the wrong checks. For example, people are playing queen g4 check or queen h8 check automatically, and that's why this problem is rated so high. But yeah, I just don't see anything better. I don't see anything better than taking on e3. So take on e3. I should abandon the rook and play rook g1 or king g1. If check here, bishop check here. So which square to go to? G1 or H1? If H1, bishop check, so then G1 seems the very clear answer, right? So king G1, if rook A1 check, king F2, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm running away. Weird problem. So king H1 is a perpetual, bishop E4 check, and if you, you can't run away. You can't get to any of these squares. Fair enough. What if you did this? Is that no good? Yeah, that's no good. Because this rook is still up for grabs. Yeah. Let's take a look at wrong moves that are made in this position. I'm certain that king h1 is one of the mistakes. Yeah, 2 king h1. Let's look at knight takes e5. Knight takes e5. I talked about this in the game, or when it came across the board. So knight takes e5 doesn't really work because of queen takes f2 check. The idea behind knight takes f5, right, is to give king h8 mate, queen h8 mate. But check, king here is forced, then queen check, rook here is forced, rook check, king h1, bishop check, king here, queen takes, check, and this will be mate. So knight comes here to defend, check, forced, check, mates. So knight takes e5 doesn't work. Queen g5 check is another move that's made. Queen g5 check, queen takes. Your rook is pinned, so knight takes, bishop takes check, pawn takes, king takes knight is the way that line goes. How did I solve that problem? By dismissing the moves that the computer, or that the common mistakes. I saw knight takes e5. I saw queen g5 check, and I saw that they weren't working. So I found other ways to make the problem work. It's as simple as that. Next problem, last problem. Knight check, pawn takes, queen check is mate. Knight check, pawn doesn't take, I win the queen. Okay, good session. It's 12:23 a.m. here in Casablanca, so that was a very late night session from me this time. I hope you learned as much as I did. It was a pretty normal session, I think. No upturns, no downturns. I think I'm getting a little bit better. I think I have a very solid rhythm now of solving the problem, looking at wrong moves.
Thanks for coming, Hank. I know this isn't your style.
One second.
I'd like to show you off.
Whoopsies. I think my upstairs neighbor is just connected to my Bluetooth speaker. Anyways, the usual end of video spiel, right? Thank you very much for watching. I will see you, ? I will hear you. You will hear me next time. And until then, good luck with your chess journey. This is The Advocate, and thank you again for watching this session. Take care.